Through the gateway of Ocracoke Inlet on the Outer Banks, explorers sailed toward the New World wilderness that would come to be known as North Carolina. To them, these Outer Banks were the edge of the known universe. Centuries before these explorers and settlers navigated the waterways of Pamlico Sound, Indian villages dotted the landscape and river inlets. In 1585, Englishman John White painted portraits of the Indians who lived near the future site of Bathtown. They fished the abundant waters of the creeks and rivers, grew corn in the fertile soil during the long growing season, and built villages and communities on the quiet peninsulas and inlets. Some of the earliest settlers in the Bath area were probably French Huguenots who had escaped religious persecution, and like all that followed, recognized the area's rich soil, natural harbors, plentiful resources, and expansive waterways that served as a highway to the world. John Lawson was a writer, biologist, botanist, and surveyor. He was paid 5 shillings for each box of flora and fauna that he sent to James Pettifer's apothecary shop in London. After arriving in the New World, Lawson traveled the inland rivers and Indian paths of the Carolinas, keeping a remarkably detailed journal that would be published in London as A New Voyage to Carolina. Lawson wrote of the Indians that he encountered,
"They naturally possess the righteous man's gift. They are patient under all afflictions, and have a great many other natural virtues. Oh, they really are better to us than we are to them. We look upon them with scorn and disdain, though, if well examined, we possess more moral deformities and evils than these savages do."
Later, when Lawson arrived at the coastal plain, was it a woman who helped him decide to stay in this region of fertile lands and fine climate? He came to the plantations of Richard Smith and settled with Smith's daughter, Hannah, on a peninsula bordered by the bay and Back Creek in full view of the Pamlico River.
At Bathtown, the unaccountable quantities of fish this great water supplies us with, and other advantages, I have nowhere met in America except here. There is nothing being wanting as to the natural ornaments and blessings of a country that conduce to make reasonable men happy.
Others joined him, and the town of Bath was incorporated by the General Assembly of the colony in 1705. Bath was now officially the first town of the province. Lawson clearly had a vision of Bathtown as a growing, thriving colonial port, and continued his work as a naturalist while his family and town grew. But as plantations flourished along the west side of Bath Creek and surrounding countryside, the displaced Indians were pushed further from the resources and land they now wanted back. An epidemic of yellow fever took many lives during 1711. After a summer of rebellion and drought, Bath was in a state of turmoil. The ever-adventurous and apparently light-hearted John Lawson invited Baron de Graffenreid of Newbern, a town that Lawson himself had helped plan and settle, on an expedition to pick wild grapes. A few days out, both Lawson and de Graffenreid were captured by 60 Tuscarora warriors. After a heated debate before an angry Indian council, which eventually involved several tribes, de Graffenreid managed to bargain for his own life, but not Lawson's. the Surveyor General of these Indian lands, was executed, burned alive for the crimes of his compatriot settlers. The Indians had warned the trespassing Europeans of the price to be paid for continuing to take over their hunting grounds and village sites, and enslaving their women and children. The Tuscarora Indians stormed through the Pamlico area on a rampage of destruction that turned Bath into a partially fortified town, populated largely by widows and children, and the town devastated by wars, drought, and yellow fever. The citizens courageously began to rebuild, and for some time Bath thrived in spirited activity. Bath was declared the first port of entry in North Carolina for the collection of customs. The waterways of Carolina opened out to the world. One day, a ship sailed into the port of Bath carrying a man whose name was Edward Teach, but who was known to the world as Blackbeard.
Blackbeard would twist his beard with ribbons in small tails and stuck lighted matches under his hat, which, appearing on each side of his face, his eyes, naturally looking fierce and wild, made him altogether such a figure that imagination cannot form an idea of a fury from hell to look more frightful.
But what about Mary Ormond? Blackbeard arrived in the summer of 1718 to sign King George's Act of Grace, a royal pardon for all pirates and privateers who would cease their buccaneering. Blackbeard was heartily welcomed into the fold by Governor Charles Eden and his Secretary of the Colony and Customs Collector, Tobias Knight. Blackbeard was also welcomed by the townspeople of Bath, who found that Blackbeard's men spent their gold freely. But Blackbeard took 16-year-old Mary Ormond, daughter of a local planter, for his 14th wife in a service performed by Governor Eden.
Meanwhile, in Virginia, Governor Alexander Spotswood realized he could enhance his declining reputation by the capture of Blackbeard the Pirate. Blackbeard was apprehended at his Ocracoke Cove by Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy. In fierce hand-to-hand combat, Blackbeard fell dead at Maynard's feet with 25 wounds. The citizens and officials of Bath were not entirely pleased, but pirates would plague the area no more. The Reverend Mr. John Garcia arrived in St. Thomas Parish of Bath in 1733. He began construction of St. Thomas Church in 1734, but it would be 28 years before it would be completed. Garcia was given a chalice for the church, said to have been presented to him by the Bishop of London. Garcia, whose salary went unpaid for 4 years, had additional troubles with the English language and with his unruly congregation.
When I preach upon any prevalent sin, I must be prepared to stand the persecution of those who are guilty of it, especially in my parish, where all kinds of profaneness has got such deep root.
With funds said to be from Queen Anne's bounty, a brass bell was purchased for the church, and King George gave 2 silver candelabra to the parish. Yet when Garcia was killed in a fall from a horse in 1744, no one would take his place for 10 years. Well-known evangelist George Whitefield was scheduled to preach to the sinners of Bath. Upon arriving in town, he discovered that another church event had also been planned. He left in a huff, cursing and condemning Bath to remain an insignificant village forever. The oldest remaining house in Bath is the Palmer Marsh House, built by merchant Michael Coutanche in 1751. The house bordered the main street in Bath so that the front room could be used as a merchant's shop, selling goods to the townspeople. In 1785, the seat of county government was moved to the new settlement of Washington. The frontiers had moved far to the west, and Bath was no longer the central town of a new province. In 1830, Joseph Bonner purchased the town lots originally occupied by John Lawson, founder of Bath. Located at the tip of the peninsula of Bath, this setting affords one of the finest views in all of North Carolina. The discovery of chimney remains, thought to be from John Lawson's earlier house, makes the Bonner House area one of the most interesting to visit.
And this picture tells you what they thought about spirits. It says that only this jug filled up with what they was good.
The Vanderveer House was built about 1790 and purchased by Jacob Vanderveer in 1824. It now serves as a museum of the town of Bath and is located next to the visitor center. In the 1800s, Vanderveer manufactured rope and was a partner with Joseph Bonner in the ownership of an early steam sawmill. Still, Bath did not grow. Towards the end of the 19th century, the lumber industry brought a semblance of prosperity to Bath. Once again, the waterways kept the town alive.
And once again, women made their mark. The Palmer Marsh House was bought by the Ormond family, possibly descendants of the woman who married Blackbeard, and they turned it into a small hotel. In 1924, the mayor and the town commissioners were all women. One day in 1925, the showboat came to town. The James Adams Floating Theater sailed up the Pamlico River and into Bath Creek Bay. Waiting for the performances in Bath was author Edna Ferber. Ferber's novel Showboat was one of the most popular books of this century, and although she did not care for breakfast at the Ormond Hotel, she stayed on the floating theater for several days while it was docked in Bath.
Today, the original town limits of Bath are the boundaries of a National Register Historic District. Many of the buildings and historic sites you have heard about in this film can be visited when you take the guided tour of historic Bath. The Reverend Mr. Whitfield's curse, that Bath would remain a small town forever, came true. But many like it that way, and the first town of North Carolina still stands, small and quiet, on the calm blue waterways of Bath Creek.